Hi, everyone. For those who are just joining, we're waiting for about a minute or two for the participants to join, and we'll start in just a moment. Okay, I think we can kick off. So welcome everyone to this webinar on science-based targets, from targets to transformation, guiding associations and their members on the net zero journey. So perhaps you're a membership organization looking at how to support your members with setting science-based targets, or just decarbonization more generally. Or perhaps you're a business who's interested in knowing how your representative body can support you with your sustainability journey. So these are topics that we're going to talk about today. This webinar is co-hosted by CAFA, Climate Action for Associations, and the Science-Based Targets Initiative, SBTi for short. And we'll have two other speakers, associations who are going to talk about their sustainability journey and engagement strategies, which are the Association of Manufacturers of Domestic Appliances and the British Metals Recycling Association. So I'll kick off by introducing myself and Climate Action for Associations, and then I'll hand over to Maria from the Science-Based Targets Initiative, and I'll add a few elements of context about how science-based targets fit in the sustainability engagement strategy for membership organization. And then I'll hand over to Rebecca and Cameron from the two associations that I just mentioned. And we'll finish with a Q&A. So if you have any questions, I was just saying earlier, so for those who are just joining, feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat so that everybody has an idea of who's attending. And if you have any questions for the speakers, you can share them in the Q&A, and make sure to include which speaker is the question directed to. So kicking off with an introduction about climate action for associations, I'm Guillaume Lane, Engagement and Impact Lead at CAFA, which is the resource and network dedicated to sustainability and net zero for the membership sector in its entirety. So we're sector agnostic, our reach is international. We're established in 2021 as a non-profit, and we're currently headquartered in the UK, but we just launched in Australia as well. We have extensive experience working with trade associations, and we have a team which is a mix of membership sector experts and sustainability experts. Our collective is currently 97 members strong, representing 350 plus associations and about 500,000 businesses and over 5 million, close to 6 million professionals. I was just saying that we're sector agnostic, so our collective includes a variety of sectors, very much like SBTi. So as sectors represented, we have chemicals, we have manufacturing, we have construction, but we also represent other membership organizations that are not necessarily trade associations, so professional bodies, institutes, colleges, and societies. Our mission is to harness the influence and reach of the membership sector to exponentially accelerate climate action and achieve net zero on one hand, and on the other hand, to decarbonize the membership sector. So in terms of how we do that, we have a centralized independent set of resources and solutions with which we support membership organizations accelerate their sustainability journey internally to get their house in order and lead by example, and also support their members with taking meaningful sustainability and climate action. And this is what this webinar today is about. It's about supporting your members with sustainability, and science-based targets form a core component of that. So why have we focused on trade associations? Trade associations have incredible power. They are under growing scrutiny from wide ranges of society, but mostly their members that are increasingly expecting sustainability engagement and support. The corporate organizations are looking for responsible policy engagement, and smaller businesses are looking for direct support in how to address sustainability and decarbonization. And with their reach and influence, both policy-facing and member-facing associations have an extraordinary position to drive climate action. So I'm going to hand over to Maria, who's going to give us more detail about science-based targets specifically. So I'll just stop sharing and heading over to you.
Great, thank you. Can you see my screen okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Guillaume, and thank you everyone for joining this webinar. I'm Maria Elma Rojas, and I'm the Europe Engagement Manager at the Science-Based Targets Initiative. So I sit within our impact team, which is really responsible for driving adoption of science-based targets and also for managing our stakeholder engagement processes and bringing feedback back into the organization. So SBTi was founded 10 years ago when the world's governments were signing the Paris Agreement. So coming together to say that they're going to work to avoid the catastrophic impacts of climate change. SBTi's founders, which you can see are the 5 organizations at the bottom of the slide, they recognized the need for the private sector to also play its part in combating the climate crisis. So it was formed between these 5 partners. We're now registered UK charity, and we also have a wholly owned subsidiary, SBTi Services Limited, which manages all of our target validation services. So what do? We define and promote best practice in setting near-term and net zero emission reduction targets in line with climate science. So we develop standards, tools, and guidance that enables companies and financial institutions to set those targets so that they can understand how much and how fast they need to reduce their emissions by. You can see here that we have a number of companies and financial institutions that have set targets. So since we launched almost 10 years ago, we've had real growth year on year, and we hit a milestone earlier this year with 10,000 businesses having set or being actively committed to set science-based targets. And that includes over 8,800 companies with validated targets today. Over 1,500 of these are based in the UK, and you can also see we have more than 160 financial institutions. And this is about roughly 40% of the global market capitalization and also a quarter of global revenue, and includes companies across all sectors except oil and gas and different size companies as well. Here you can see a little bit more about the growth that we've seen throughout the years. These 2 graphs come from our SBTi trend tracker, which we published just shortly a few weeks ago, and it monitors the adoption of science-based targets and commitments across regions and sectors. So it really offers like a really good up-to-date insight into how businesses worldwide are aligning with climate science and accelerating their net zero transition. So you can see there's been strong growth in target adoption. The total number of companies with validated net zero targets tripled by the end of Q2 in 2025 compared to the end of 2023. And as I mentioned, it covers 40% of global market capitalization and a quarter of global revenue. I think this really underscores how climate goals are rapidly becoming embedded in core business strategies worldwide. And we're really happy to see that companies are taking this voluntary but essential climate step. Okay, so why are we seeing this growth? Why set a science-based target? Well, I think we should start with risk. Many industries are vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. So physical risks related to climate change have the potential to cause severe economic damages and disrupt supply chains. These impacts are already being felt. A survey actually by Morgan Stanley found that over half of companies that they surveyed had already experienced an impact on their operations from physical climate-related events in the past year. And this had already led to increased costs for over half of those affected, worker disruption, and revenue losses for close to half of those surveyed. So these risks are increasingly they're growing essentially, and they're increasingly being felt by companies as well. And in addition to giving companies the confidence that they're taking a proactive and science-based approach to the biggest challenge of our time, science-based targets come with various business benefits. So, of course, you're addressing risk, as I mentioned, and preventing economic losses that are related to those risks. It's also really demonstrating a company's commitment to reducing emissions within its value chain, and that sends a really important signal to internal and external stakeholders. It's a signal that can rally employees around a common goal, and it's also an important indicator for investors and consumers who may be looking at a company's climate commitment as a criteria for investment or business. So we really see that taking action is not only a responsibility, it's also an opportunity, and that businesses that delay solutions will have a harder time, will face higher costs, and also climate risks that are more severe. So we hope that you can share some of these benefits with your members and highlight how important it is for industries to go at it together. Okay, I'll tell you a little bit more about science-based targets themselves. So in simple terms, a science-based target is a public-facing target that a company, financial institution, or an SME, so companies of any size, can set. And it communicates ambition. So it's the ambition that you're going to decarbonize your business at a rate that is consistent with what climate science deems necessary to limit average global temperature rise by 1.5 degrees Celsius, which is what the global scientific community has agreed is essential to avoid the most catastrophic impacts of global temperature rise. We offer two different types of targets. We have a near-term target, which has a timeline of 5 to 10 years from the submission date, and a net zero target, which are long-term through to 2050 or earlier. So each target is developed based on the company's own inventory and in alignment with the SBTi criteria. We are set up in this modular structure where we have a cross-sector standard of our corporate net zero standard, which we're also in the process of updating at the moment and are holding public consultation for very soon. So please be on the lookout for that. Your input is really valuable, and all of our standards are produced through a public consultation process and also through piloting with companies and getting feedback from lots of stakeholders. So just a note to be on the lookout for that coming out very soon, our second round of public consultation. We also have a financial institutions net zero standard, which was published in July. And we have our SBTi sector-specific standards. You can see on the right of the screen that some of these are already being used and some are also being updated at the moment or in development. And there are two routes for setting targets, a standard route for corporates and financial institutions, and then an SME route that is more streamlined and essentially recognizes that SMEs have limited resources and might have less scope and capability to set Scope 3 targets. So because of this, SMEs are not required to set near-term targets for their Scope 3 emissions, but they must still commit to measure and reduce these emissions. Okay. Can't tell if I'm going very fast or too slow, but just reaching the end here, I really want to talk about, how we hope you can engage your members in setting science-based targets. So I think the journey for each association will look very different, but we have put together just an outline of what this engagement could potentially look like, starting with encouraging your members to take climate leadership. Again, you might already be doing this. We think setting science-based targets is a really good way to encourage that and helping them understand that, it's one of the first steps required and the importance of taking this type of action. Establishing a collective goal is another really great way to do this. through CAFA, we've been working together in this partnership for the last year and have seen how many associations have set goals for their members to take action, and that can include setting a science-based target. So it always makes it easier when a group is doing it together. We really encourage you to offer guidance and training in target setting. CAFA and SBTi have great resources for this already. So sometimes it's just about connecting those dots. We have a very exciting announcement happening tomorrow. We are launching an SBTi Academy, which will offer free training on science-based targets. So I will also send the link out for our newsletter so you can be informed when that's available. And lastly, I think one of the great things about associations is that you can really share what's happening in your industry, in your sector, with your members. So sharing some of those lessons that are coming up, some of the best practices and milestones, as well as some of the challenges that you're seeing as companies make progress on their targets and on their climate journey, I think is a really great step. Also in motivating others to start on their journey if they haven't already. So just to close, I think individual corporate action is really essential. We're really happy to have 11,800 companies on and financial institutions on board, but it's not enough. To truly get to net zero at the pace required, we need collective action at the sectoral level, and associations are really pivotal, as Guillaume said. They can play a huge role, so we hope you will join us and encourage your members to set science-based targets. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Maria. And yeah, to reiterate, if anyone has questions, feel free to ask them in the Q&A or in the chat. And yeah, thanks a lot for this super clear presentation, Maria, about science-based targets. And to reiterate also about where science-based targets fit in your sustainability journey as a membership organization. So it's really important to emphasize that science-based targets are a huge component of your members' overall sustainability journey and therefore your sustainability engagement strategy, which Maria has laid out a great example of, which is fully aligned with CAFA's best practice framework in terms of sharing best practice, establishing a collective goal, sharing guidance and resources. So yeah, thanks a lot, Maria, for all these points. So, of course, the ultimate goal is to reduce global greenhouse gas emissions, and for your members, that's useful to comply with existing regulations, but also to prepare for upcoming regulations, which I know a lot of CAFA members are working on. Due to the amount of work that these regulations require, it's best to anticipate and prepare for them when they come. And of course, as Maria, you described, any effort and any support that you can give your members to avoid climate risks, which Marie described as well, is extremely important. So science-based targets are a super important part of the overall decarbonization process. So I know that a lot of membership organizations don't necessarily have a sustainability manager or sustainability lead. So just to put science-based targets as a step within a journey, we first start with GHG footprinting in the first year, which is also a time when you can start decarbonizing on obvious sources of emissions and start working with SBTi so that you can work with them on what you'll need to do in order to set and validate a target, your members. So science-aligned decarbonization planning can therefore start in the first year and will probably go into the second year for bigger businesses. Science-based targets, as Mira describes, is probably the core way to align with climate imperatives and climate science. And then SBTi also recommends beyond value chain mitigation because climate imperatives are global. And even though more and more businesses are setting science-based targets, we're putting all chances on our side if we also support decarbonization beyond our own value chains as a business. So SBTi has great guidance on this. And then, yeah, decarbonization measures can start from year one, once again for obvious sources of emissions, whether they're related to combustion-based transport or gas heating or examples like that, where fossil fuel use is obvious and significant, and then other measures can trickle down from the planning that will be done beforehand in collaboration with CAFA, in collaboration with sustainability experts, or from the work of your sustainability manager, sustainability lead, if your membership organization has one, or your business has one. And reporting is another very common, another main source of another main area of impact, I should say, and work. So everything that's been done beforehand, GHG footprinting, science-based target setting, decarbonization planning, these are all the things that are going to be reported on to internal teams within your members' organizations, but also to the broader public as disclosure. So where do they fit in your sustainability engagement? Membership organizations have such a role in preparing members for regulations and managing emissions. So important that these steps that Maria outlined, you implement with your members, whether it's on science-based targets, but also on broader decarbonization. But also engage on policy engagement for regulations that can protect industry long-term from climate risks. And so where do science-based targets fit in your engagement strategy? You can first cover the basics, so GHG footprinting, climate change and sustainability. It's supported for members, especially smaller businesses, to be on the same page about what climate imperatives are, what climate risks are, and what are the most common mitigation measures that they can put in place. And also covering the essentials with your members as a membership organization. So that includes regulations that I just mentioned. And then in terms of supporting with science alignments, once again, I'm repeating the same thing, but science-based targets are a core component, and Rebecca from the Association of Manufacturers of Domestic Appliances is going to give a good example of her overall sustainability engagement strategy and how she's working with SBTi as part of that. And then the British Metals Recycling Association, presented by Cameron, will explain how, in a complementary way, they're aligning to climate imperatives by working on a industry-wide decarbonization pathway and program of support. So this process can be repeated for carbon, but also for biodiversity and other areas of sustainability. So in terms of how to get support, a lot of membership organizations are strapped for resources, operating with very low bandwidth, sometimes having one or two staff members only. So get support from leaders in the field, get support from the Science-Based Targets Initiative, and get support for climate action for associations. I've put email addresses on screen for you to contact us directly. And it's really important to use the help that's available to take off some of the workload off your shoulders to deliver the best possible sustainability support to your members. And then you can also learn and connect with peers. So Maria was talking about sharing best practice among members, but that's also something that we encourage and help so support between associations directly at CAFA, but also in this webinar. So you'll be learning from MDIA and BMRA as an example. So yeah, handing over to Rebecca from the Association of Manufacturers of Domestic Appliances.
Thank you very much, Guyan. So I represent the domestic AMDIA, which is the Association for Domestic Appliances Manufacturers here in the UK. Sorry, next slide, please, Dan. We represent over 90% of all the large appliance brands that you will know in your kitchens and bathrooms. And what we do as an association is we advocate for our industry. We help to shape policy. We provide regulatory updates and market information to our members. And we particularly promote excellence in manufacturing, which of course means sustainability. Thank you. Next slide. So for us, we have, as I said, we represent most of the brands that you will see in your homes. One of the challenges that we have at AMDIA is that the manufacturing for domestic appliances is largely conducted offshore in other countries, some in Europe and some further afield. But our members are very much on different stages of the journey. So some of our members, for instance, Beko, which won the one of the most sustainable companies award in the Time magazine top 20, is a very good example of some of the companies that have gone quite far on the journey. Triton showers, which are manufactured here in the UK, use science-based targets. Electrolux, which are not manufactured here, manufactured overseas, but again, they are using science-based targets and going very far. But other members are less advanced on that journey. So for us, we have a number of areas that we consider when it comes to sustainability and net zero targets. The first is the manufacturing supply chains, which we have little influence over other than to advocate to our members to adopt science-based targets or other similar targets, trying to achieve best practice. We also have to consider domestic appliances in use, and great strides have been made here for reducing carbon emissions. They are now incredibly environmentally sustainable in the sense that they all have eco settings, which I very much ask you to employ when you're using your domestic appliances, because that's the most energy efficient use. We also promote appliance repair and care. We recently looked at a study which shows how, I mean, it's obvious really, but how repairing an appliance actually is very much more carbon sustainable than buying a new appliance. And we look at the appliances end of life, which is the recycling and refurbishment of appliances to prolong life and reduce emissions. Thank you. Next slide. So in terms of promoting best practice, we have an annual conference which since 2022 has focused on the journey to net zero and sustainability. And we ask our manufacturers to come and present what they're doing towards sustainability and net zero. For those members that don't attend the conference, we send out a full conference report detailing the discussions and the conclusions to all of our members and invite them to read that as obviously a good example of best practice. Thank you. Next slide. The conference that we held last year, we also invited inspirational speaker, Sir Jonathan Porritt, who is one of the first climate action activists, I would say, in the UK. He's been talking about the need for climate action since the 1980s. And it was important to remind our manufacturers, our members, why what we're doing is so important. So it reaches beyond regulation and reputation and all those things. It really matters. And Sir Jonathan Porritt gave us some very scary statistics about the impact of climate change throughout the world, and made us all sort of realize that we're doing this for the good of the planet, not just our own businesses. Thank you. Next slide. So as I said, we promote best practice. We host webinars, and in fact, Maria very kindly gave our members a webinar on science-based targets last week. We have a member sustainability group, which is the sustainability leads from all of our manufacturers, and in which we do try and discuss common issues and ways in which Andia can support those members. Thank you. Next slide. And we also have, in the last year or so, introduced video case studies where we go and film in our members' headquarters or manufacturing outfits and show really best practice in everything that they're doing. So we've got a number of videos which we're aiming to show the entire supply chain and showing how members, even if they're based here in the UK and don't do manufacturing here in the UK, they can still adopt science-based targets or reduce their carbon emissions through what they do. Thank you. One example of a manufacturer that is doesn't do manufacturing here in the UK but has a head office over here in the UK is the best practice video we did with SMEG. They have made huge reductions in their own carbon emissions through introducing solar panels, which provide all of the electricity for their headquarters. And they're also looking at biodiversity in the grounds that they have, which is, in fact, they even produce their own honey from the honeybees that they have on their roof, which is really nice. So we hope that this inspires other similar companies to do the same. Thank you. So we provide assets for members in the form of these videos. These videos are very successful with our members, and they are incorporating them into their own sustainability reporting and advocacy, which we're really pleased to see. Thank you. Part of what we do at Andia, and that our members are really keen that we do, is that we promote energy savings through to consumers. We are very keen that whilst the manufacturers build appliances that have, as I say, eco settings and energy saving modes, that we encourage consumers to use those. Obviously, while the energy supply, our electricity supply, is not fully decarbonised, there is, there is still a footprint, but we encourage consumers to reduce that footprint through using the most efficient models that they can afford, but also, more importantly, utilising those eco settings. We have a campaign called Know What's What, which we relaunched, in fact, last week. And so far, over the years that we've been running it, we've reached millions of consumers through that. But that's an entirely industry-driven campaign that we feel that we should be doing as an industry to promote out the benefits of using more efficiency settings in domestic appliance use. Thank you. Our Know What's What campaign basically has, as I say, another factor, which is that it also demonstrates to government that we're a responsible industry and that we take this very, very seriously in terms of getting consumers to understand how to use their appliances for maximum energy efficiency. Thank you. In terms, Guillaume mentioned the role that associations play in policy development. We are actively engaged with many departments in government, looking to, in fact, one of the key messages that we have to government is for the UK government to align with EU regulations, which are far outstripping current UK regulations when it comes to sustainability. And that's something that our manufacturers are very much behind. In fact, most of our manufacturers already adhere to the EU regulations, which are, as I say, advancing further than our own regulations. But we work with DESNZ, DBT, DSIT and DEFRA to make sure that there is alignment across the UK and the EU since Brexit. Thank you. And that's in a nutshell what we do for our members, and I'd be grateful if anyone's got any questions. Thank you.
So feel free to once again enter your questions either in the Q&A section or in the chat, and we'll take 5 to 10 minutes at the end of the webinar to answer them. So yeah, handing over to Cameron, who's going to share with us his recent work on industry GHG monitoring and work on a decarbonisation pathway for members.
Can you see that okay?
It's that's it. It's now full screen. All good.
Perfect. Thank you, Guillaume. My name is Cameron Leach, and I am the British Metal Recycling Association, or the BMRA's Policy and Sustainability Manager, and I'll be delivering a short presentation, I hope, on the BMRA's roadmap to net zero. So, a short introduction to the BMRA. Oh, I can't move my slide. Can you see that moving?
It's not moving yet.
Oh, I can do it this way. Okay, so the BMRA is the only trade association in the UK representing its metals recycling industry, which is an industry which contributes 9 billion in gross value added to the UK economy each year and comprises of over 15,000 jobs across 2,000 businesses. I'd argue, although Rebecca's presentation might state that this is actually around the time that the BMRA's focus on sustainability, particularly from a decarbonisation perspective, has been relatively recent. It was only in 2022 that the BMRA constituted its Sustainability Committee, formerly its Carbon Action Committee, which is now the committees dedicated to exploring best practice in decarbonisation and promoting the environmental credentials of the metals recycling industry. Although I do say so myself, I do argue that the committee has been quite helpful in producing collateral and assets which have been helping its members to decarbonise their operations, including our first project, which was a poster which was placed on site in plant machinery, but also on site more broadly, that promoted an anti-idling policy that was there to reduce our members' costs, but also to reduce our members' emissions. But more recently, we've been on some more bigger projects, including the creation of our Sustainability Hub, which acts as a one-stop shop for our members to procure various sustainability initiatives, whether that's using the BMRA's bespoke emissions, Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions calculator, or whether that's procuring carbon literacy training for employees or carbon offsets. We also have a useful documents and links section where we promote the SBTi. I also thought, as the focus of this webinar is on the SBTi, it would be good of me to mention that the modal average BMRA member is a family-run SME, and as such, notwithstanding the SME pathway now that SBTi has, that the majority or the overwhelming proportion of our members are not in any way accredited or approved by the SBTi. But we have had one member very recently had their submission approved by the SBTi, and they are our largest member with a turnover well up in excess of 4 billion. So let me move on to the granularity of our project, the Roadmap to Net Zero, which can be separated into 3 sections. The first is an emissions quantification, where we've commissioned external consultancy and will be the focus of the first 2 or 3 slides. The second part of that Roadmap to Net Zero is an emissions roadmap, again, where we've commissioned an external consultancy to identify the technologies which will enable the industry to align with net zero. That's also been done in collaboration with the Sustainability Committee. And then the third, and I'll touch on it in our last slide, is our key policy asks, of government that will enable the transition to net zero, particularly for hard to abate emissions, but also for those where the technologies are too cost prohibitive or where we're trying to create an environment that enables decarbonisation, perhaps outside the system boundary of where we've done the measurement. So let's begin with that quantification. So the external consultancy has quantified 4 of our members of varying size, with each of our individual participants receiving their own report, which is delivered in accordance with the Greenhouse Gas Protocol and ISO 14064, and enables those participants to have their own hotspot analysis and a reduction initiative plan to align with net zero. What we've been able to do is then use those sample of 4 members and then extrapolate that data with other industry datasets that are publicly available to produce a BMRA or industry report, again, in accordance with the Greenhouse Gas Protocol and ISO 14064. And what that looks to do is to provide that extrapolated industry figure that other operators can benchmark against, but also provides a baseline for decisions for the association to decarbonise the industry going forward. And again, in part by doing that, it identifies the hotspots where emissions are occurring within the industry's value chain that would need to be decarbonised to align with net zero. So, to go into the project in a bit more granular detail, this slide in and of itself won't necessarily be useful for members or those on the call today, but it's important to note because if you were to look to replicate a project of this nature, this is the sort of data, these are the sort of graphs that you would be able to ascertain. So as you can see, all the participants' emission data has been quantified and the final BMRA report is in progress. As you can see, irrespective of the size, which does have, of course, a positive correlation with the emissions that are being produced, the overwhelming proportion of emissions sit in that Scope 3 category, which suggests that from an industry perspective or from a trade association's perspective, we're going to be needing to collaborate with downstream and upstream partners if we're going to be serious about aligning with the UK government's net zero target. I'll also be touching a bit later on this Scope 2 emission category, which you can see for 3/4 of the members that participated were able to report 0 or nil emissions from a market-based perspective. How that's actually raised a problem or a challenge for the overall quantification. As you can see, when we drill into one member in particular, but this data again is commonplace for all 4 members, you can see that the overwhelming proportion of the emission category sits in the processing of sold product, which for our member would mean that the emissions occurring when they essentially sell their scrap metal that they've processed to a smelting operation, whether that's a steelworks or an aluminium foundry in the UK, or whether that's an aluminium foundry abroad, and they smelt the material to create a semi or finished product, and that the generation emissions that are occurring on a site of that nature are significant and outweigh the emissions that are occurring on a metals recycling site. You can also see that the second and third largest emission category relates to transport. And that again really emphasizes that if the BMRA is going to enable the industry to reach net zero or do what it can, it's going to have to collaborate with partners, upstream and downstream logistics companies, metals producers, in order to ensure that the industry can align with net zero, because that is where the overwhelming proportion of the value chain emissions are occurring. You can also see from a Scope 1 and Scope 2 perspective that mobile combustion, i.e. diesel use in plant machinery and in mobile fleet, are where the emissions are occurring within the operational control of the metals recycling industry. So as we move to the second part of the BMRA's roadmap to net zero, the decarbonisation pathway or the emissions reduction plan, you can see that the external consultancy has now produced a roadmap to operational carbon neutrality for Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions by 2050. And you can see they've identified some low-hanging fruit, some quick wins that will enable the industry to reduce incrementally its emissions, whether that's procuring a REGO certified tariff, improving building insulation. Arguably, those are 2 initiatives that any industry could look to produce to quickly reduce their emissions. You can see a more niche initiative replacing propane with biopropane is second on that chart. But you can also see that the overwhelming proportion of emissions are reduced when the industry switches to hydro-treated vegetable oil or HVO for mobile equipment vehicles. And that, again, is demonstrating, and it might not be the case with every industry, but with this industry, it demonstrates that one solution can provide a significant proportion of that emissions reduction. The reason why I suppose it's further along in the chart than earlier on is because currently HVO is around 20% more expensive than the current technology diesel, and therefore the external consultancy in collaboration with the Sustainability Committee have taken a view that it's not necessarily conducive to business success to implement that technology now, but perhaps we can implement some key asks of government to create a policy environment where the costs of that technology do come down in the short to medium term. So when we look to incorporate Scope 3 emissions, you can see that there's many more initiatives identified, but you can also see that the emissions in a raw total increase substantially. I think if we switch between 1 and 2, you can see actually that if you were to do the calculations on the baseline and the final figure, that is a 90% reduction. But due to the uncertainty in the data to date, you can see that the reduction is only around 75%. So we're not truly aligning with net zero, and that's because there's too much uncertainty in the data, which will draw me to one of the conclusions a bit later on. But you can see that the overwhelming, again, proportion of emissions that sit in that process and sold product category require initiatives that are focused there in order to reduce those figures. And you can see, fortunately, in the UK government has given £500 million of taxpayers' money to Tata Steel in South Wales to convert their steel furnace from a blast furnace to an electric arc furnace. And that will lead to a significant reduction in emissions. One, due to the transportation emissions that are being, to be able to, instead of exporting the material out of the UK, it can go to South Wales. But also the process in which that scrap metal is converted into a semi-finished or finished steel product is being reduced, and that's because we've had to take a global average of the various export markets rather than the exact steelworks that material might be going to, because we don't have that in the data. You can also see that very further on the right hand side of this roadmap, you can see that there's a similar initiative. So on the left hand side it says UK steel industry electric arc furnace, on the right hand side it says working with metal producers with lower emission industries. And that's because the external consultancy doesn't know where exactly the material might be going. That is an opaque value chain, but that will be critical to reducing that process and sold product category. But more generally, SBTi has sector-specific guidance on the steel industry, and steelworks across the globe are looking at how they can reduce their emissions. But if it's requiring £500 million of taxpayers' money and potentially 1 billion, given that that support is expected to British Steel, it's going to require a significant amount of investment to ensure that the metals recycling industry and the metal producing industry can align with net zero, and thus there's too much uncertainty in the data to make an accurate representation or extrapolation for a long-term target there. So we've only managed currently a 75% reduction. That draws me to the conclusions, which I'd argue straight away that if you were looking to replicate a project of this nature, you're going to require a significant buy-in from a significant minority of our membership in order for the quantification to be accurate. So as an example, if we take you back to the slide where I mentioned that 3 out of 4 of our members were reporting zero in their Scope 2 emissions, that's because 3/4 of the participants were purchasing a REGO certified tariff for the electricity that they were consuming in that reporting period. Now, as a Sustainability Committee, we felt that if you take that as on face value, that 3/4 of the industry were also procuring such tariffs, we thought that's unrealistic. So we had to supplement the sample data with a survey of our members, where we were able to ascertain actually it's around 25% of members that were obtaining a REGO certified tariff, and therefore you need that buy-in from a significant minority of membership in order to ensure that your extrapolation is going to be accurate if that's what you want it to be. It also requires you to have expertise either in-house or within the consultancy when you're looking to replicate this project. And what I mean by that is that you either need a policy or a sustainability manager in-house that has expertise within the value chain, but also with regards to sustainability, or you need that consultancy to have worked in your industry previously. I used the metaphor that the external consultancy is a bit like a calculator, and you need to be you are providing it with inputs, or your members are providing it with inputs, and they're doing the calculation and assigning the emission categories. But if the inputs are wrong, then the output are going to be wrong, and a calculator isn't necessarily going to know that the inputs are wrong. So unless they have expertise within that consultancy, or you as the expertise in-house are able to collaborate with the consultancy to make that as accurate as it can be, it's likely that you're going to have some mistakes in there. So those can be ameliorated by having that expertise. In the long term, I think you need to think strategically about how you're going to engage the wider value chain. And from a trade association's perspective, that will often mean collaborating with other trade associations, i.e. the trade associations that represents the metal producing industry. It might be, in our case, working with Rebecca's association, because one of the materials that our members are processing are those consumer goods, like consumer appliances. So how do we create an environment in which the way in which they produce those materials are easy to be recycled, because that reduces emissions in the long term. I say that because sometimes when you look at a value chain, sometimes trade associations can be competing for members, and that working relationship might be strained. But if we're going to achieve net zero, there's going to have to be a positive working relationship with other actors within the value chain, other trade associations, to ensure that can be a reality. And lastly, I'd suggest that policy asks are going to be critical to satisfying your senior leadership team and your members' concerns. And that's because ultimately, by doing a quantification in accordance with the Greenhouse Gas Protocol ISO 14064, all you're doing is identifying the emissions and then looking to establish how you can decarbonize those emissions with a pathway to align with net zero, which is ultimately, in at least a short to medium term, going to add significant costs to your members, to your businesses. So you need to identify the policy asks to ensure that you can ameliorate potentially those added costs. Without doing so, you might risk not being able to get this report published. It's separate. It's a bit different from a life cycle analysis where you may be able to demonstrate that net benefit. But if you're looking to align with net zero, it's ultimately, I guess, an organizational assessment that you're going to need to do, and thus identifying those key policy asks and trying to influence government to create a policy environment in which decarbonisation can take place is going to be critical. So I think that concludes my presentation. I know the question is going to be asked just shortly after this, so I'll appreciate any that come my way. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Cameron. Yeah, and Rebecca, both your presentations were very insightful in terms of how membership organizations can support members, and you both covered a lot of areas of influence that associations can have. Yeah, I really want to emphasize these points about policy recommendations and asks and cross-sector collaboration, which is true for trade associations, but also for like the idea of collaboration is also important between members to share best practice, to share know-how. That's really important, and having a relationship with strong partners in the sustainability space who can help your footprint, who can help you set science-based targets, etc. So yeah, super interesting. Thanks a lot. And we're going to move to the questions. We have a first one. Let's see. Oh, I need to find the question. Oh, and by the way, some of you are watching from LinkedIn. So if you have questions, you can enter them in the comments under the post, and someone from the team will share them with us. So yeah, let's see the first question. So we have a question for Rebecca. How do you combat greenwashing in the domestic appliance industry?
Greenwashing is a concern for, I think, all industries. The appliance industry, I suppose I would say this, wouldn't I? But my experience of the appliance industry, I come from other industries, is that in fact, if anything, they downplay the advances that they make in terms of what they're doing through the supply chain, and also the in making machines more and more efficient. To combat it, we have to look at data, independent data sources. We tend to look at data sources such as Euromonitor, and we find from various Euromonitor reports that appliances, for instance, are longer lasting than they used to be. And that's in a situation where, particularly in the UK, they're used more frequently. So people put washing loads on more frequently. In terms of other data like carbon emissions and stuff, we are reliant on our members giving us that data, and then trying to sort of package up that data in a way that's understandable to consumers and to government, because they use different data sources. So unfortunately, unlike Cameron, we're not able to do that kind of study because of our manufacturing bases being all over the world. Some are in China, some are in Europe, some are in other places, and they use different metrics, let's say. But overall, what we're trying to do is, if anything, is sort of underplay the claims, but make sure that the claims are fully justifiable through data sources that people respect. I hope that explains a bit.
Thanks, Rebecca. And I have another question for Maria. So you've talked about the two routes for setting a target, and historically, Science-Based Targets Initiative has a wealth of experience supporting corporate organizations. I know we've talked about this earlier, but what would you say to a membership organization or business who still thinks that SBTi is focused on corporates and not SMEs?
Thanks, Guillaume. I wish I had the numbers of how many of our members are SMEs, and maybe we can share that after. But a large number of SMEs have set targets. And again, we do have a streamlined way for companies to set targets. I didn't mention the full pathway, but basically SMEs are also not required to commit, and they have a much lower cost for being validated. We're also exploring through our public consultation for Corporate Net Zero version 2. We're exploring a different tier system for companies. So having companies categorized both across, which covers size and also where they're based. So just trying to get better at addressing some of that nuance and that capacity across different companies. And again, your feedback super helpful in that. But I think SMEs, have a role to play, and we are trying to make it as accessible as possible for them to set targets and get started on that journey. All of our resources are publicly accessible, and we have specific resources for SMEs. So again, really encourage you to take a look at those.
Great, thanks a lot. Well, we're coming up to time. I had one last question for Cameron, but I might ask it to you, and we can include it in the follow-up if that works for you. And just to wrap up, just to emphasize what resources can be available for your members. You can work with SBTi or with CAFA to deliver sessions and guidance to your members to help them build capacity and address decarbonization as a whole, but also more specifically science-based targets and science alignment, and also draw examples and inspiration from other associations and other membership organizations like MDIA and like BMRA, who can help you with their case studies, their experience, their lessons. They can help you save some time and know what to do and save you some headaches probably. And yeah, just so this recording and these slides will be shared in the follow-up. We have a link to join the Climate Action for Association Collective so that you can be put in touch with SBTi, but also with other associations. Or you can set a science-based target if you're a business directly with the link here. And you can always contact Maria or Alison, who's the CEO of CAFA, to get support and ask additional questions that you may not have had time to ask today. So yeah, coming up to time. thanks a lot for attending this webinar, and wishing you the best for your sustainability journey and your members' journey. Thank you, everyone.